Night call. Daniel was sitting alone in his darkened living room, the shadows dancing on the walls from the flickering television set. The clock on the mantelpiece showed 11:47, and the world outside his little house was still, except for the irregular rustle of leaves from the evening breeze. He was midway through a documentary on deep-sea dwellers when his phone vibrated on the coffee table, its contact scraping against the glass. The screen illuminated, and an unfamiliar number was shown, but there was no caller's identity. Daniel scowled. He didn't often get phone calls this late, and his friends always had names saved under his contact list. He paused, his thumb over the decline button, but curiosity prevailed. He touched the green icon and held the phone against his ear. "Hello?" His voice came out guardedly, nearly drowned out by the soft hum of the television. The line was long and still, only punctuated by the faint hum of waves in the distance. Then a voice broke through, a voice that caused Daniel's breathing to stall in his throat. His voice. It wasn't a recording, wasn't an initiation, but his voice, full of a shaking desperation he didn't feel. "Don't go out tonight, Daniel," it warned. "Under any circumstances, don't go out." The line cut off before he could answer. Daniel looked at the telephone, his heart pounding against his ribcage. It had only been a 7-second call, according to the screen. He placed the telephone gently down, as if it could bite him, and looked at the front door. The deadbolt was secure, the chain still on. He was alone, hadn't any known enemies, and his house was ordinary, a one-story rental house on a peaceful street. This must be a prank, he convinced himself. Some kid who had a voice modulator or a recording off his voicemail. He got up, walking to shake off the discomfort, and looked at the windows. All were closed, the curtains drawn. The analytical part of his head was telling him it was nothing, but the recollection of his own voice, pleading and desperate, grubbed at him. He sat back down on the couch and turned off the television, listening for any noise from outdoors. The wind had died away, and now the stillness was oppressive. The phone rang again. Same number. Daniel's stomach churned, but he picked it up, his voice more acidic this time. "Who is this? What do you want?" "Daniel, listen to me," his voice repeated, hard and urgent. "Don't go outside. It's waiting out there for you. Open the door and it'll come inside." The words came short and tense, as if through gritted teeth. "Stay inside. Please." The call cut off. Daniel's fingers trembled as he dialed 911, but the line refused to connect, full bars, and still the call refused to go through. He tried to text a friend, but the messages refused to send. Cold sweat broke out on his skin. He approached the front door, peeking through the peephole. The porch was clear, the streetlight casting an eerie white light over his mailbox and the neighboring hedgerow. Nothing stirred. He thought about fleeing to his car, which was only a mere 10 feet away, but the warning was still fresh in his memory. "It's waiting for you." He reversed, standing back to the kitchen, picking up a knife from the block. It was reassuringly heavy, but he could not imagine what he was going to be confronted by. He sat at the dining table, holding his phone and the blade in turn, waiting for the clock to tick beyond midnight. The telephone rang a third time at 12:03 a.m. Daniel's breathing constricted, but he picked it up, unwilling to resist the voice, his voice, on the other end. "Why are you calling?" he demanded. "What's out there?" The voice didn't reply to his query. Instead, it whispered, "It knows you are thinking of going. It can hear your thoughts, Daniel. It's nearer now. Lock the windows again. Double-check them." The call ended, and the faint creak sounded from the rear of the house. Daniel stood stock still, his heart pounding against his eardrums. The voice had drifted from the direction of the hall, close to the guest room. He clutched the knife more firmly and moved quietly, opening and closing each of the windows according to the voice's directions. They all locked, but the atmosphere was off, thick, as if the house was keeping its breath inside. In the guest room, he discovered the latch on the window was a little loose, though he was positive he'd closed it before. He tightened it, his fingers shaking, and stepped back into the sitting room. The TV was off, but he hadn't changed the channel. The room was dark, shadows deeper. He was sitting on the couch, knife resting across his knees, and looking at the phone, hoping it would remain still. But somewhere inside him, he was certain it would ring. Whatever was going down, it wasn't finished. The voice, his voice, had been full of fear, and that was catching, oozing into his marrow. At 12:30 a.m., when the clock struck, Daniel hadn't heard a thing outside since the ringing had started. No wind, dogs, or cars. The outside world was eradicated, replaced by what the voice had mentioned, what was waiting. Though he could not hear it, he could feel it against the house, a storm building. Daniel hadn't stirred from the couch for close to an hour, his eyes locked on the telephone as one might stare at a curled snake. The knife rested on his lap, its blade reflecting the thin light from a table lamp, the sole light he had allowed himself. The house was too still, the sort of creaking floor and buzzing refrigerator amplified. He'd checked the windows again twice since the last ring, hoping to find something waiting for him beyond the glass. Nothing. Only his own white, empty-looking self. The 1:15 a.m. call broke the silence. The same unfamiliar number showed on the screen. Daniel's mouth dried out, but he still picked it up, his voice little more than a whisper. "What is it you want?" "It's not what I want." His voice came back, hoarse and strained. "It's what's out there. It's closer now, Daniel. It can send you fright. Don't look out the window. Don't think about it." The voice took a hold, and Daniel could swear he heard the rustle of something being scraped over the pavement. "It's stalking the house. Be still. Be silent." The call ended, and Daniel's eyes flicked toward the curtains. The temptation was so strong, a primal compulsion to see what was out there. But the voice's warning stayed his hand. He tightened his grip on the knife, his knuckles white. The presence of something stalking his house, something that could smell his fear, was ridiculous, but it was real, and he could feel its presence carried on the air. He rose, compelled to walk, and paced to the kitchen. The window on the back door was draped with a thin curtain, and he tried to suppress the urge to move it aside. He double-checked the lock instead, then headed to the basement door. He hadn't been down since the calls started, and the dark, cluttered space caused his skin to crawl. But he must be certain. He opened the creaking door and flipped on the light. The shade flickered, casting ugly shadows off the concrete floor. He slowly descended, looking over the basement. Old clothes stuffed into boxes, a broken chair, an exercise bike covered in dust. Everything was like he'd left it. The air was chilly here, damp, and the stillness was different, like it was looking at him. He examined the little window close to the top, too small for a child to fit through. It was locked, but the glass was dirty, like something had been against it from the outside. He cleaned it off with his sleeve, his heart pounding, and saw only darkness outside. Upstairs, he closed the basement door and leaned against it, panting. The phone rang again. He almost dropped the knife as he rushed to answer it. "Stop this," he begged. "Tell me what it is. You don't want to know." His voice was barely louder than a whisper now, as if he was speaking from far away. "It's not human, Daniel. It's not something you can comprehend. It's waiting for you to make a mistake. Don't touch the door. Don't touch the windows. It's listening." The line cut off, and a gentle thump sounded against the front porch. Daniel stood stock still, his breathing quick. It wasn't a knock, but something large moving against the door. He moved through the living room, keeping close to the floor, and listened again. Another thump, and then a slow scrape, nails scratching against wood. His heart was racing. A branch? An animal? But the words kept echoing. It's not human. He stepped back, going into the hallway, which gave him a view of the front door and the back door. The scraping ceased, but the stillness afterward was worse. He was vulnerable, the walls of the house too thin, too weak. He was tempted to yell, to scream for whatever was out there to come out, but the impulse died on his lips. What if it replied? The clock was 2 a.m. Daniel was sitting on the floor, spine against the wall, knife clutched in his hand. He didn't dare turn lights on, didn't dare make a sound. The voice had instructed him to be quiet, and despite the fact that he didn't know why, he followed instructions. The house was now too small, the corners he knew too strange and menacing. Every shadow moved, every creak a threat. He considered his own life, his work at the library, his solitary nights, his upcoming visit to his sister next month. All of it was far away, a dream that wasn't his own. The only thing that was real was the phone, the voice, and the presence outside. He didn't know what it was, but he was certain it was waiting for him to make a misstep. The floor of the hallway was chilly under Daniel's feet, his legs aching from sitting for so long. The knife had become a weighty burden in his hand, but he refused to lay it down. The clock on the wall counted its way toward 3 a.m., each tick leading to eternity. The scraping against the door ceased, but the hush was no comfort since it was oppressive, as if it was only waiting before worse was to come. His phone was next to him, screen dark but foreboding, as if waiting to suddenly come alive. He tried to make sense of the callers. A tech-savvy prank caller, possibly, or a mental episode, his own mind imagining voices under pressure. But those thuds on the doorstep, the smeared basement window, the fact that his phone was unable to connect him to anyone else, those weren't hallucinations. Something was going on, and he was right in the middle. At 3:07 a.m., the telephone rang. Daniel's heart skipped a beat, but he picked it up, compelled by a desire to know. "What does it want?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why me?" His voice was weak on the other line, nearly hidden by static. "It doesn't need anything you can provide, Daniel. It only needs you. It has been watching you for weeks, waiting for the evening. Don't approach the windows. It's attempting to trick you." There was a strangled sob, then the line went dead. Weeks. The word stuck in Daniel's head like a splinter. He tried recalling signs, unusual noises, misplaced objects, anything. There was the episode when his car keys had gone missing for a day, only to turn up on the kitchen counter. Or the light tapping on the glass outside his bedroom the previous week, attributed to rain. Had it been stalking him then too? A dull hum arose somewhere within the house. It was low but increasing. Daniel got up, knife held high, and traced it to the sitting room. It was emanating from the television, which was on, but showing only static. He was sure he turned it off after the first call. He ripped the cord out, and the screen was black, but the hum continued, now accompanied by a weak crackle, sounding like feet crunching on gravel. He turned, hoping to catch something, but the house stood empty. The crackling ceased, only to be replaced by another noise, a gentle, rhythmic tapping on the back door. Tap, tap, tap. It was purposeful, nearly courteous, as if a visitor who was certain they would be admitted. Daniel's mouth dried out. The voice had instructed them to leave the door alone, but the tapping became louder, more insistent, causing the frame to shake. He stepped back, going to the bedroom, the room that was farthest from the back door. He locked the door and jammed a chair under the handle, but he knew it would never be enough to prevent anything from entering. The tapping came next, now at the bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. The curtains allowed only a peek outside, but he could sense something against the glass, pushing against it. He sat on the bed, his hand wrapped tightly around the knife, and endeavored to pray, but the words refused to come. He wasn't a religious man, but the act was a lifeline, a means to ground himself against the creeping horror. The tapping ceased, and he believed it was finished. Then the phone rang. He replied, his eyes streaming with tears. "Please," he implored, "let me know how I can prevent it." "You can't prevent it." His voice was calm now, almost resigned. "You can only wait. It's pushing you, Daniel. It wants you to snap. Don't open the door. Don't venture out. Dawn is approaching. Hold on." The call stopped, and the tapping, now at each window, produced a gentle, unrelenting rhythm. Daniel rolled into a ball, covering his head, but the noise pierced his thoughts. He could feel the presence of the thing everywhere, filtering through walls, perpetual and present wherever he was. The house was no longer his, but that of whatever was beyond the glass, and he was only a visitor, confined within a game. Daniel hadn't slept, hadn't so much as closed his eyes since the tapping started. The bedroom was now his prison, the chair still jammed under the door, the knife his sole companion. 4:30 a.m. flashed on the clock, and the blackness beyond seemed permanent, as if day would never break. The tapping ceased, and the stillness was worse, a vacuum alive with expectation. He sat on the floor, his back against the bed, looking at the telephone. It hadn't rang for almost an hour, and he wasn't certain if that was a mercy or an omen. His mind was unraveling, thoughts spinning into chaos. He saw it out there taking form, a shadow with too many limbs, an empty face, a voice that whispered his name. He shook his head, attempting to clear it. The voice, his voice, had instructed him to wait for sunrise. As long as he could last, maybe it would pass. But the house was alive, its walls groaning, its shadows changing, as if working in league with what lurked outside. The call came at 4:45 a.m. Daniel answered, his hand trembling. "Is it over?" he questioned, his voice rough. "No," came his voice, now icy and cutting. "It's inside. It must have slipped by you when you investigated the basement. It's been here the whole time. Don't move. Don't breathe. It's close." The line cut off, and Daniel's breathing ceased. Inside? He looked around the room, the shadows twisting in the corners. The chair against the door was unmoved, the window latched. He hadn't seen or heard anything, but the voice's conviction was unwavering. He clutched the blade, his gaze flashing to the closet, the floor under the bed, the gap under the door. There was a faint shuffle from down the corridor, the feel of fabric against the floor. Daniel's heart was racing, his eyes blurring with unshed tears. He could scream, he could move, but the voice had warned him not to. He pushed himself against the bed, attempting to turn himself into a shadow, his breathing short and erratic. The shuffle came closer, coming to rest beyond the doorway. He listened for a knock, a scrape, anything, but nothing followed. Then, a whisper, his own name, but spoken aloud, and not through the telephone. It was from the other side of the door, and it was hushed and deliberate. "Daniel." A hand clamped over his mouth, he swallowed a sob. The whisper came again, but closer now, as if lips touched the wood. "Daniel, let me in." He didn't budge, didn't breathe. The knife shook in his hand, useless against whatever lurked beyond. The whisper ceased, and the shuffle dissipated down the corridor. Daniel counted the seconds, hoping it was gone. But the words from the voice lingered, "It's inside." He rose, unable to remain still, and edged to the door. He pushed his ear against it, listening. Silence. He was thinking about opening it, going through the house, but the recollection of the whisper stayed him. He checked the window, making sure the latch was locked. The curtains were thick, but he could sense the presence of the thing outside, waiting for him to glance through them. The telephone rang a second time. He picked it up, speaking quietly. "Where is it?" "It's everywhere." His voice, now a hiss. "You allowed it to enter, Daniel. You didn't listen. It's within the walls, within the air, within you. There's no escape now." The line concluded, and a menacing laugh resounded from within the closet. Daniel spun, the knife clutched aloft. The closet was open, though he was positive it had been shut. He stepped closer, every movement agony, and pushed it open. It was empty. Nothing but clothes and cardboard, but the atmosphere was off, thick with earthy dampness. He closed the door hard, his breathing ragged, and retreated. The laugh came anew, now from beneath the bed. Daniel knelt, looking into the shadows. Nothing but dust and shadows. He stood, light-headed with terror, and saw that the house was no sanctuary, but a cage, and he was its quarry. Daniel stood in the middle of the bedroom, the knife clutched in his hand, as the clock counted down to 5:30 a.m. The house was a maze of dangers, each turn containing a whisper, a cackle, a creak. The phone hadn't sounded for almost an hour, but its stillness was little comfort. It was the quiet before the storm. The voice had spoken the words that the thing was within the walls, within himself. He wasn't certain what it was talking about, but the words had wormed into his head, knotting his thoughts together. He hadn't been able to bring himself to leave the room, hadn't been able to make a move. The chair was still wedged beneath the door, the window locked, but he could feel as though the creature could see through the walls. The air was thick and oppressive, and the smell of damp ground clung, intensifying every minute. He questioned whether or not he was going mad, whether or not the voice was his own insanity taking shape. The smudged window, the knocking, the whispering at the door, he could still feel them, could still sense them. Too real. At 5:45, a light trickled into the room through the curtains, its first light creeping over the floor. The voice had instructed him to wait for the morning, that it may cease. Daniel grabbed onto that hope, fragile as it was, like a thread waiting to be broken. He took a few tentative steps toward the window, avoiding touching the curtains, and listened. The world outside was unmoved, no birds, no traffic, only the crushing presence of the night remaining. Daniel's heart fell when the phone rang. He picked it up, his voice nearly whispered. "Is it over?" His voice sounded different now, calm, nearly gentle. "It's never over, Daniel. You let it in. It's inside you now. But you got through the night. That's more than most." A moment's pause, and then a gentle laugh. "Look outside. It's safe now." The call ended, and he stood there, gazing at the phone, the words resounding. Safe now. He didn't believe it, but the light filtering through the curtain was brighter, a gray-colored promise of morning. He stepped toward the window, his hand shaking as he reached for the curtain. The voice had warned him that it was dangerous to glance, but it had also promised him it was safe. He had to know. He drew aside the curtain, only an inch, and looked through the glass. The backyard was deserted, the grass wet with dew, the sky a dull gray. Nothing stirred. No shadows, no human forms, no thing. He broke out into a sweat, relief rising over him, but quickly fading. Something was off, as if the world was taking a collective breath, holding it. He averted his eyes, and the mirror became visible, catching his attention. His own reflection gazed back at him but was distorted, his eyes too large, his lips twisted into a subtle, unfamiliar smile he hadn't tried to produce. He blinked, and the reflection blinked, but the smile persisted. A sense of desperation washed over him. He lifted the blade, and the reflection lifted the one it held, but its movement was slow, a slow, studied movement. "Daniel," the voice whispered, but his lips didn't move. He backed away, the knife clattering onto the ground. The reflection moved out of the mirror, its shape wavering like television static. It was him, but not, its eyes empty, its grin ravenous. He sprinted, ripping the chair from the door and running into the hall. The house was lightening, dawn creeping through the windows, but the creature was behind, its footsteps slow, its voice shouting his name. He grabbed the front door, struggling to work the deadbolt, and pushed it open. The street was mundane, cars, mailboxes, the neighbor's dog barking. He staggered onto the porch, panting, and glanced back. The house was vacant, the object missing. But standing there, the cell phone buzzed against his leg. He took it out, the unfamiliar number on the screen. He didn't pick it up, couldn't. The call ended, and a voicemail was left. Shaking, he played it. "Stay indoors tonight, Daniel," his voice instructed, shaking. "It's waiting for you." He let the phone drop, his screams sounding through the morning air. The nightmare was only starting. It was far from over. The neighbor's dog. The cul-de-sac on Maple Lane was still, the sort of still that was like holding one's breath. Houses stood neatly arranged in a crescent, the lawns trimmed, the windows aglow with the gentle light of evening. Ethan Harper, a high school history teacher and lover of routine, enjoyed it that way. He had occupied the blue colonial at the terminus of the street for 3 years, enjoying the regularity of his neighbors' lives. But that evening, as he graded papers at his kitchen table, the stillness was disrupted. A bark cut through the evening air, guttural and jagged, like the cry of something hurt. Ethan's pen froze on the page. He looked at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Something barked again, louder, more urgent, from the Thompsons' house across the street. Their hulking German shepherd, Rex, was not one for sudden barks. Rex was a stoic animal, one who could be found lounging on the Thompsons' porch, amber eyes following cars by with languid disinterest. This was different. Ethan swept his glasses back up his nose and stood, walking over to the window. The street was dark except for orange patches cast by streetlights. The Thompsons' house was still, its curtains closed, no movement to be seen. Rex's barking became frantic, a rhythmic pounding that thrummed through Ethan's own chest. He stayed, hoping Mr. Thompson would come out, maybe to calm the dog or bring him indoors. No one showed. The barking ceased suddenly and was replaced by a low, raspy growl that caused Ethan's skin to crawl. He opened his front door and stepped onto the porch. The autumn air was cool and fresh, filled with the smell of fallen leaves. On the opposite side of the street, Rex was standing frozen in the Thompsons' front lawn, head down, ears back. His growl was aimed at the house, as though whatever was within had roused him. Ethan paused. He wasn't on close terms with the Thompsons. Polite nods and brief weather chat were the only extent of their interaction. The behavior of the dog nagged him, though. He stepped off the curb, scraping his sneakers against pavement. "Rex," he spoke softly, keeping his distance from the dog. Rex's head turned, eyes flashing under the street lamp. For an instant, Ethan expected Rex to charge, but the dog simply whined, a plaintive cry that sounded incongruent for so large an animal. He rapped on the Thompsons' door, the knuckles sounding through the stillness. Nothing. He rapped again, harder, but the house was motionless. Rex's whimper grew to a gentle whine, and he clung against the porch stairs, shuddering. Ethan's discomfort grew. He got his phone out, weighing whether to call for backup, animal control, for instance, or the police. What was he going to say? The dog was being odd. It sounded idiotic. Rather, he crouched only a few feet away from Rex, speaking softly. "What's wrong, boy? Are you okay?" Rex's eyes snapped back to the house, and he emitted another menacing growl. Ethan's eyes followed that of the dog, and he noticed that the curtains inside the front window were pushed aside, revealing a narrow band of darkness. He squinted, attempting to discern forms, but there was nothing. However, the hairs on his arms stood on end, as though the house itself was observing him. He stood and stepped back. "I'll be by to check on you tomorrow," he said to Rex, though it was a lie. As he walked back to his own house, the growling started again, softer but no less unnerving. At home, Ethan pushed the door shut and leaned against it, his heart racing. He attempted to return to grading, but his thoughts kept returning to Rex, to the way the dog had looked at the house, like it contained something awful. He slept fitfully that evening. He dreamed of barking, shadows creeping through walls, a house breathing. When he woke, the cul-de-sac was still, but memory of Rex's snarls stuck like a bruise. He determined he would speak to the Thompsons tomorrow, perhaps inquire whether Rex was ill or under some form of tension. It was the right thing to do as a neighbor. But as he stood at his kitchen window, sipping his coffee and looking out, he noticed Rex still lingering in the yard, sprawled across the grass, staring at the Thompsons' front door. The dog hadn't budged since last night. And the Thompsons' car, Ethan suddenly realized, was still parked in the driveway, right where it had been the night before. Morning didn't bring any respite to Ethan's discomfort. The cul-de-sac was filled with weak sunlight, the sort that enhanced every feature, highlighting everything too strongly, too starkly. He stood at his porch, coffee mug to hand, gazing at the Thompsons' house. Rex was still standing in the yard, his large form curled tightly into a ball beside the porch stairs. The dog's eyes, still unblinking, stayed glued to the front door as though waiting for something to appear. Ethan stepped off the sidewalk again, his breath misty in the cold. He yelled for Rex, but the dog didn't move. Ethan could see that the animal's hair was dirty, tangled, as if he'd been digging or rolling on something filthy. There was a damp, chemical-like smell clinging to him, not the scent you'd expect from a dog but something sharp, acrid. Ethan looked at the house. The drapes were still closed, the windows empty. He knocked, more insistently than last night, and hollered, "Mr. Thompson? Mrs. Thompson? Anyone home?" Silence, and it was oppressive, weighing down the air, like the stillness that precedes a storm. Ethan tested the doorbell, and its chime was thin and faint within. No presence, no voices, nothing. Ethan took a step back, and his eyes fell on Rex. The dog's ears moved, but he didn't shift. Ethan's gut churned. The Thompsons were a private family, yes, but something was off. Their car was sitting out front. They hadn't spoken of going anywhere. And Rex didn't seem himself. He took out his phone and scrolled through his contact list, seeing that the Thompsons wasn't there. He barely knew them, anyway. Mr. Thompson was an old accountant who kept his old Buick immaculate, and Mrs. Thompson was an intense rose gardener. They were a presence on the block, unobjectionable but steady. Ethan deliberated and then called Mrs. Larson, the widowed woman who lived next door to the Thompsons. She answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Larson, it's Ethan Harper, from over the street," he explained. "Have you noticed anything going on at the Thompsons' house lately? Their dog's been behaving strangely, and I can't get anyone to open the door." Mrs. Larson's voice was a thin, tinged with worry one. "Dear, I haven't seen them since Tuesday, I think. Helen was gardening, pruning roses. Haven't spoken to them since. And that dog's been barking fit to be tied at night." He thanked her and hung up, growing more anxious. It was Friday. 3 days since anyone had laid eyes on the Thompsons. Ethan moved to the side of the house, looking into the backyard. The rose bushes were immaculate, trimmed neatly, but the back door was ajar, only a crack, as if somebody had left it that way by mistake. Ethan's heart accelerated. He called again, shouting, but his voice was consumed by the silence. Rex gave an abrupt, loud bark, causing Ethan to startle. The dog was standing now, looking toward the back door, hackles raised. Ethan moved closer to the door, then halted. Something about the opening was off, an invitation he wasn't supposed to take. He moved back, choosing instead to call the police. Let them do it. As he came back through the front yard, he saw something on the grass beside Rex, a small, dark object half hidden in the earth. He knelt, pushing aside the soil. It was a key, an old, tarnished one, with an intricate handle that didn't seem the sort to fit a contemporary lock. Ethan tucked it into his pocket, not knowing why but feeling he had to hold on to it. Rex followed him, eyes big and unblinking, as if the dog knew more than Ethan himself. At his own house, Ethan called the non-emergency number for the police. They promised to send a patrol by to visit the Thompsons, but the dispatcher's attitude was one that made it clear it was an afterthought. Ethan couldn't concentrate on lesson plans, and every minute his mind kept going back to the key he had in his pocket, to the open back door, to Rex's unrelenting glare. He glanced out his window. Rex still stood there, unmoving, sentinel over a house that was now more like a tomb. The police showed up that afternoon, one officer alone in a patrol car that was out of place on the neat cul-de-sac. Ethan stood on his front porch and watched as the officer, a stocky, bored-looking man, rapped on the Thompsons' door. Rex stayed still, didn't bark, only observed with those unsettling eyes. The officer walked around the house, looked through the windows, then turned and headed back to his car. He called on his radio, presumably to report seeing nothing amiss, before heading off. Ethan's irritation increased. Something was off, and he could feel it, though he could not quite define it. The key, which was in his pocket, now weighed more, its edges digging into his thigh. He took it out, spinning it over between his fingers. The metal was chilly, the fancy handle etched with complex swirls that appeared to move whenever he gazed too long. It was not a house key, he was certain. Perhaps it was a shed or an old trunk key. Why was it, however, in the yard? Why was Rex so concentrated on that place? He set out to investigate. Not the house, not quite, but the Thompsons. Perhaps there was a garage or a shed that he had missed. He took a flashlight and stepped over into the street as dusk was falling, the sky going purple. Rex's head came up as Ethan approached, and he let out a gentle whine. "Easy, boy," Ethan spoke softly, keeping his own distance. The dog's eyes followed him, suspicious but unaggressive. The Thompsons' yard was bigger than he'd ever imagined, held in place by a picket fence and a line of close-set evergreen shrubs. Ethan shone his light over the lawn, searching for anything amiss. The rose bushes stood out, their blossoms still vibrant after the sun's departure. He drew nearer, noticing a clump of overturned ground at the base of one shrub. It appeared newly dug, as though something or someone had been digging. Rex's tangled coat popped into his head. Had the dog done that? He knelt, shining his flashlight at the ground. Something caught the glare beneath the earth. He swept it clear, and a small, rusty lockbox was revealed, dotted with the pockmarks of aging. His heart pounded. The key. He rummaged it out of his pocket, fingers shaking as he wedged it into the keyhole. It turned over softly, and the top opened. Inside was a packet of papers, yellowed and fragile, bound together by a discolored ribbon. Ethan hesitated, looking across at the house. The back door still stood ajar, a black slit in the mounting gloom. He untied the ribbon, unrolling the top sheet. It was a letter, spidery hand, 1973. The writing was difficult to make out in the fading light, but certain words stood out. The thing in the cellar, it watches, we can't leave. Ethan's lips dried. He pushed the papers into his jacket, thinking wildly. Who had written this? And why was it hidden here? The abrupt growl yanked Rex back to reality. The dog stood upright, eyes fixed on the house, his muscles taut. Ethan turned to follow his line of sight. The back door was open further now, but only a little, but he could sense it. He hadn't moved it. A light noise was coming from within, a gentle, steady thumping, or what sounded like footsteps going downstairs. Ethan's breathing hitched. He retreated, papers gripped tightly, and stepped into the street. Inside, he locked the front door and laid the papers out on his kitchen top. The letters were disjointed and composed by a Margaret, telling of an increasing horror within the house. There was a cellar, a presence that moved through the dark, something that had driven the husband mad. The last letter was incomplete, in mid-sentence, as if cut off. Ethan's hand trembled as he read. The house had been constructed by the Thompsons back in the 1970s. Had Margaret resided there? And what was down in the cellar? Outdoors, Rex resumed barking, an urgent, plaintive cry that could be heard out into the evening hours. Ethan didn't sleep. The letters spread out on his table, their words creeping into his mind like damp rot. Margaret was frightened, and what she wrote about the thing in the cellar was vivid and unclear. She was writing about shadows moving without light, whispers rising from below, and the descent into muteness by her husband after he descended to see what it was. Ethan kept looking over at the Thompsons' house, a dark shape blocking out part of the street. Rex's barking had ceased, but the silence was worse, thick with waiting. By the next morning, Ethan was determined. He didn't want to wait for the police to listen to his worries. The Thompsons could be in danger, and Rex's actions, his obsession with the house, told him that he must have known more. Ethan took a crowbar from his garage, telling himself it was for protection, though he wasn't certain from what. He walked across the street, his heart racing. Rex was nowhere to be seen, no longer standing in the yard. The vacancy hung between them, like a threat. The back door, too, stood ajar, as he'd left it. Ethan shouted, "Mr. Thompson? Mrs. Thompson? It's Ethan, from next door." His voice was small, swallowed by stillness within the house. He pushed open the door, the hinges groaning. The house was still, the air stale, and it carried that same acrid scent he'd detected on Rex. The kitchen was neat, dishes piled in the sink, a newspaper spread on the counter to Tuesday's date. It was as if everything was normal, but off, as if the house was holding its breath. He walked through the living room, his flashlight slicing through the shadows. Old furniture filled the space, the air thick and full of dust. He spotted a door standing half-hung back by a coat rack. The cellar. His gut twisted. Margaret's letters had spoken of it over and over, always full of foreboding. He tightened his hold on the crowbar and pushed open the door. A blast of cold air buffeted him, bringing an odor like damp earth and something pungent, almost metal. The stairs led down into darkness, wooden and weathered. Ethan paused, his flashlight only lighting the first few stairs. He shouted again, hoping for an answer, half expecting none. Nothing. He stepped, then stepped again, the wood groaning beneath his feet. The darkness was almost palpable, denser than it would likely be. At the bottom, his flashlight lit a concrete floor, rows of jars on the shelves, and one bare bulb dangling from the ceiling, its filament unlit. A movement out of the corner, a shadow at the periphery of his eyesight. Ethan swept the flashlight, but there was nothing. His heart pounded. He stepped again, and his toe bumped into something yielding. He bent to look. Rex. The dog was rolled into a ball, shuddering, eyes wide and terrified. Rex, Ethan breathed, crouching. The dog whimpered, huddling closer, as if for cover. And then he saw it, a door, flush into the back wall, constructed from thick wood and iron hinges. It was nowhere on any blueprints Ethan could think of. The air about it was different, colder, heavier. He rose, irresistibly drawn to it despite every self-preservation impulse to turn and make a dash for it. The crowbar in his hand was useless. He touched the handle, then paused. A murmured sound came from beyond the door, a slow one, rhythmic, like breathing. Ethan edged back, taking Rex's collar. The dog struggled, then followed, scratching the concrete. They ascended the stairs, Ethan's legs trembling. Outdoors, the light was too intense, unreal. Rex fell into the grass, gasping for air. Ethan glanced back over at the house, the open rear door a gaping black hole. He realized he could not leave it that way. Whatever it was down in the cellar, the Thompsons could still be trapped inside. He sat at his kitchen table, the crowbar laid out before him, Rex sprawled at his feet. The dog, too, had tagged along, and when Ethan tried to send him back, Rex refused to return. Ethan didn't blame him. The memory of that door to the cellar, that breathing noise, stuck to him like wet fabric. He called the police again, demanding they send someone to search the house. They agreed, but Ethan couldn't shake the impression that it was already too late. He read Margaret's letters over again, looking for clues. One spoke of a ritual, something that her husband had discovered within an ancient book, intended to bind the creature within the cellar. It hadn't succeeded. The last letter had him heading downstairs, axe in hand, never coming back. Ethan's gaze fell on the crowbar. He wasn't a hero, not like that. But the Thompsons may still be alive, trapped beneath what Margaret had feared. The police came at midday, 2 of them this time. Ethan told them everything, the dog, the letters, the creaking door into the cellar. They listened, dubious but courteous, and led the way into the house. Ethan stayed outside, Rex against his leg. Minutes ticked into an hour. When the officers returned, they had gray looks, their words abrupt. "No one's home," one reported. "But we discovered something down in the cellar. We're phoning for backup." Ethan's stomach fell. "What did you discover?" The officer hesitated. "Bones. Old bones, hidden away somewhere. And some newer items. Clothes, possibly. We don't know at this point." He remembered the Thompsons' car, their kitchen untouched, their silence. He remembered Rex, who had witnessed something awful and had tried to warn them all. The house was cordoned off by the police, and then came more and more cars, detectives, forensic experts. Ethan stood on his porch, standing guard, Rex's head on his knee. That evening, an officer appeared at his door. "We located them," he whispered. "The Thompsons. They were inside that room, among the bones. Like they'd been there for a while." Ethan's throat closed. The officer hadn't referenced the breathing, the presence Ethan had sensed, but his eyes betrayed a spark of fear. Once they had gone, Ethan sat beside Rex, the dog's warmth anchoring him. The letters on the table, which had served only as warnings, now stood as grim reality. Whatever was down in the cellar hadn't only taken the Thompsons. It had been there for decades, patiently waiting, watching. Ethan glanced at the crowbar, then at Rex. The dog's eyes locked onto his, steady, as if telling him he had seen it too. Ethan moved. He couldn't remain in the cul-de-sac, not with that house across the street, its basement door left untouched in his mind. He took in Rex, giving the dog a new home, a place to recover. Occasionally, though, at night, Rex would snarl at nothing, staring at the black. And Ethan lay awake, questioning whether the creature in the basement was really gone, or if it had come after them. Ethan's new apartment was worlds apart from Maple Lane, a third-floor apartment complex in a busy city block where traffic hum filled the air and drowned out quiet. He moved for that noise, hoping it could overpower the recollection of the Thompsons' house, the cellar door and breathing beyond it. Rex, now an ever-present companion, appeared to adapt, his hulking form stretched out on the living room rug most afternoons. The decision was rushed, done within weeks of the investigation by the police. The cul-de-sac was unbearable, its empty streets taunting him with the presence of that house. The police had cordoned it off, calling it a crime scene, but the accounts they presented were incomplete. Human remains, decades old, entwined among the Thompsons' possessions. There was nothing about the letters, the ritual, or the thing he had sensed in the basement. He hadn't mentioned the breathing to them. It sounded crazy, even to him. His new schedule was easy: teach by day, take Rex for walks at dusk, don't dwell on the past. The past followed him, however, through the letters from Margaret, which he had stashed behind a locked drawer, and to Rex's sudden, inexplicable growls. The dog would sometimes halt mid-step on walks, listen, ears perked, to empty corners or alleys. Ethan would yank on the leash, speaking softly, but his heart racing, his eyes scanning for something he could not define. As twilight fell and the air grew sharp with autumn, Ethan detected a difference. He was grading papers at his little kitchen table when Rex, generally happy to snooze, came erect in one sudden movement, his hackles standing on end. The dog's eyes were trained on the apartment door, a growl vibrating in his throat. Ethan laid his pen aside, his skin tingling. "What's it, boy?" he whispered, his voice little more than a murmur. He didn't budge, his growl rising, increasing in volume. Ethan got up, walking toward the door. He placed his ear against it, listening for the creaks and groans of footsteps or voices down the corridor. Nothing. The building was old, walls thin, but there was complete silence. He pushed the door open a little, looking out into the dimly lit corridor. It was empty. Still, Rex's growling grew stronger, his muscles coiled, as if prepared for battle. Ethan shut the door and locked it, attempting to comfort the dog. "It's okay, Rex. It's just the city, most likely." His words sounded false. He looked over at the drawer where the letters lay, the reminder being there weighing constantly. He hadn't opened them since moving, fearing what would be roused. But Rex's actions didn't feel unfamiliar, too much like those nights on Maple Lane. Ethan settled, holding the dog close, and waited it out. The growling ceased, but Rex's stare never wavered from the door. The following morning, Ethan discovered something strange. While walking Rex, he spotted a rusty old key set against the grass close to the entrance of the apartment building. It was the same as the one he had discovered at the Thompsons, same intricate handle, same icy metal. His breathing halted. Hadn't he left that key with the police? He couldn't recall. Shaking his hand, he picked it up, and its presence was unsettlingly familiar. Rex yelped, pushing against his leg, as if telling him to release it. At home, Ethan held the key under the kitchen light. The patterns on its handle twisted, as before, creating spirals that gave him a headache. He locked it away in the letters drawer, telling himself it was an accident. Rex growled again that evening, however, but this time at the drawer. Ethan slept poorly, and when he slept, it was tormented by visions of an opening cellar door, shadows pouring out like ink. At the end of the week, Ethan was descending into chaos. He called out sick, could neither concentrate nor work, and wasted hours gazing at the drawer. Rex's behavior escalated, the dog moving agitatedly, his growls punctuated by high-pitched barks. Ethan knew he had to move. He could not dismiss the key, the letters, or the dog's alerts. Whatever had been at the Thompsons, it hadn't been contained by the house. It had followed them, or possibly it had never been tied to the house to begin with. He stood before the drawer, the key clutched in one hand, Margaret's letters clutched in the other. Rex lay in the background, eyes agape, a low whine slipping from him. The apartment was too small, walls closing, city sounds dampened as if the world beyond had come to a halt. Ethan was at a crossroads. Destroy the letters, toss the key, act as if none of it ever occurred. Or he could meet it, whatever it was. He spread the letters across the table, reading them aloud for the first time in months. Margaret's letters had been more desperate than he recalled, the fear jumping off the page. She mentioned the ritual now that he paid closer attention, a circle of salt, lights, words written in an unfamiliar language. Her husband had hung it to trap the creature within the cellar, but it hadn't worked. The last letter was about a door, one different from the one Ethan had observed, one deeper, hidden. "It's not locked," she wrote. "It doesn't have to be. It wants to be found." Ethan's eyes moved to the key. He believed it was for the lockbox in the Thompsons' front yard, but what if it was for something else? The possibility gave him a queasy stomach. He glanced over at Rex, who had also ceased whimpering and now stood tense, his eyes trained on the apartment's closet door. It was an unadorned door, white paint, looking ordinary. Ethan hadn't opened it much since he moved in, using it to stash boxes he had yet to unpack. His heart racing, Ethan moved toward the closet. A chilly air wafted toward him as he approached, the scent of a stale, acrid smell creeping through the opening under the door. He clutched the key, though he wasn't certain why. It was irrelevant to modern locks. He pushed the door open, seeing cardboard, vacuum, nothing out of the ordinary. Rex, however, growled, a dangerous, low rumble, his eyes scanning the rear wall inside the closet. Ethan moved the empty cardboard off to one side, his light illuminating a seam within the wood, a barely visible outline for a little door, little more than 3 feet tall, its edges closed off by old paint. He stood stock still. The seam was never on any apartment floor plan he had ever looked at. The scent was more potent, that chemical stink from the Thompsons' home. Ethan's hand trembled as he followed the line. Paint creaked beneath his fingers, and below it, a small, intricate keyhole, the same shape as the key clutched in his palm. He was thinking about running, about calling the police, but Rex's growl kept him rooted. The dog had witnessed something awful before, and he was seeing it now. Ethan pushed the key into place. It slid smoothly, clicking home softly. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway, walls rough stone, that led down into blackness. The air was musty, rich with the scent of earth and metal. Ethan's flashlight pierced only a little way into the shadows, but he could see stairs, rough and weathered, going down. Rex pushed against him, shaking but not backing off. He stepped, then another step, and the tunnel swallowed him whole. The walls appeared to throb, or was that the beat of his own heart? Down at the end, the tunnel led into a little chamber, the floor littered with odd symbols, circles, akin to the symbols Margaret had spoken about. In the center was a doorway, wooden, iron-hung, the same as the one found in the Thompsons' basement. The breathing noise came again, louder, rhythmic, on the other side. Ethan's nerve finally broke. He backed away, pulling Rex, and slammed the wardrobe door shut. He barricaded it with boxes, shaking so hard that he could hardly move his hands. Rex whimpered, a plaintive, urgent bark, but Ethan refused to meet it, yet. He locked the apartment door, flipped on every light, and sat down beside the letters, the key still clutched tightly in his hand. Morning brought no resolution. The door was still closed, but the scent still hung there, and Rex still refused to set a paw inside it. Ethan recognized he could not linger. Whatever was on the other side, it wasn't gone. It had followed them, or it was everywhere, waiting to be discovered. He grabbed a bag, leashed Rex, and departed, pledging never to return. However, as he slipped into the city's cacophony, he could feel the key lodged in his pocket, its presence an assurance that the door would find him next.